So hello everyone, thank you for coming this evening. I'm going to let Margo explain. She's much better at it than anyone, the presentation tonight, but I know we're all excited for it, and I wanted to thank you all for coming. At the end of the evening, if you could take a bit of printed material for Salem Award, which is now Voices Against Injustice, and Witch House, and possibly leave a donation, that would be wonderful. But I'm going to let Margo take over from here, and very, very happy to have you.
My name is Margo Burns. I'm probably best known for being the associate editor and the project manager of Records of the Salem Witch Hunt. It took a team of 12 of us 10 years, not 10 years probably. Took a team of 12 of us 10 years to go through and transcribe in infinite detail all of the primary sources of the Salem witchcraft trials. It is available in paperback, and I make no money on it because we had to split it 12 ways. But if you're really interested in it, that's how I am known academically and professionally. And I decided last year that somebody needed to take Ergot head on. The basic premise of that is the notion that somehow the accusing girls had been exposed to a fungal toxin in the grain that made their bread. And this explains their symptoms and explains the whole witchcraft trials. I mean, anybody heard this before? Yeah. Yeah, all right. Usually at the end of a talk, there's somebody in the back goes, well, it's coming. I read, I'm waiting, it's coming. Girls had moldy bread. And I went, oh, ding, ding, ding. So we're going to start a little bit, because that's the question. Oh boy. So we're going to do a little bit in this place. We're going to do a little call and response. We're going to have to prompt you a little. So we're going to the things that aren't necessarily so about the Salem witchcraft trials. So here we have, circle of girls plagued with fortune telling. No. Upham made that up. So you can chime in with me. You can chime in with me. Tituba taught the girls voodoo. No, Starkey made that up. What's her first name? Marion Starkey. Came up with something in the 50s. A lot of people had read it. Arthur Miller had read it. So, okay, now the girls dance naked in the woods. No, Miller made that up. Huh? In the winter even. Okay. Good. Okay. Abigail and John got it on. No! Miller made it up too. Okay, the girls ate moldy bread. No! Capital made that up. Girls are tripping. No! Spanos and Gottlieb debunked it. Yeah! Ergot! No! Okay, so we got that out of our system that, people come up with stuff. They see this complex events in the lens, in the filter of what they bring to it. So I'm going to we're going to take a trip today about why do we know what we know? How do we know this? Whenever I give talks or I tell people that I'm an expert on this, they immediately say, well, and they bring up the moldy bread, they bring up Ergot. And I've been guilty of this. Talking a lot and stuff like this, and I'm sure if you have any contact with the public and somebody brings this up to you, it's sort of like, it's been debunked. No. And it was just, can't we move on to the real thing? Well, the question came to my mind, how do all these people know this? I mean, it was an article in Science Magazine. Who reads Science Magazine? Okay, now notice I asked how many people have heard this theory, and everybody raised their hand practically, and 2 of you say you read Science Magazine. So this is the original article. It was written by a woman named Linda Capel. Until recently, she was on the faculty in psychology at Rensselaer, and she's just retired, which made it a little difficult to track her down. But I did. And she and I have been corresponding. So I'm going to put a little bit of our correspondence in this talk because I think she's gotten a bad rap. I really think she's gotten a bad rap. As a matter of fact, when I talked to her about it, she said, aren't people really more upset about Mary Matosian? I think all this stuff is about Mary Matosian. And I'm thinking, everybody says Capro. Mary Matosian is a Johnny-come-lately. So I was going, that's interesting. I mean, she really was interesting to talk to. And I don't think people really engage with her. They know this article, and it's been debunked. But she's been very interesting to talk to, very insightful, and has asked me some really interesting questions that have made me think a little differently about things. Now, the first question you're going to ask, right? I can hear this is coming at the end. You don't believe it, do you? Yeah, right? You're always, oh, she converted over. I think in the course of this talk, you'll find out what I believe, and it's a little more complicated, but we'll get there. I haven't gone over to the dark side, but it's been wonderful talking to her. Now, you may know that this started as a college paper. She was a senior at University of California. I'm going to slow down. University of California, Santa Barbara. She was a science major, and she had to take something in the humanities to graduate, distribution requirements. So she signed up for a history class. And this is a class. I actually contacted the archives at UC Santa Barbara to see, do you have these things? And sure they do. And this is the course. She could remember that it was History of American Women from Colonial Times to, and so I looked at, there it is. And she said within 2 weeks of the class, she had to come up with the topic for her research paper. I mean, this is a gut class. I mean, freshmen would take this class. And she had to do this. And there were a whole lot of sections of different topics, and this happened to be the one that caught her interest. So 2 weeks in, she had to come up with the research paper topic, and she really wanted to do something about the naked Quaker woman running around, but somebody else already took that one. So she had to, she just on the fly hear all these things. So she decided to pick Ann Putnam. Thought that might be interesting. And when she started putting this together and sent it out, talked to the TA, who she couldn't remember, except that she said, well, the TA didn't seem especially impressed, and asked, well, how is this women's history?
Yeah.
Okay, huh? It was about women, but, So she really wasn't impressed with the TA and how the TA was doing anything for her. When I got this, I found out who the TA was. There's her name. And I wondered if she ended up doing anything in history. Here's the TA. Well, it turns out she just retired. Well, everybody's just retiring. She just retired from Bakersfield College. And she continued to teach things about American history and women. But when I looked her up, it said she had a bachelor's degree from Smith College and an MBA from Antioch. And I went, maybe I got the wrong person. I mean, how many female professors with that name are you going to find out there? So I kept poking, because that's what I do. I keep looking and looking and looking. And finally I found a little biographical bit about her when she was giving a talk to the local historical society that said she was ABD in history at UC Santa Barbara. I did reach out to try and get to her. I sent her an email. I left a message on the phone. I talked to a colleague, gave the colleague my contact information to give her. Never heard back from her. I really, really want to know if she knew what happened to that paper. I really do, but I don't know yet. So as far as the story goes, let Linda explain the basics of it.
I think that the original causes of the girl's behavior, and this behavior was what started the crisis, was eating contaminated bread, and that the bread is contaminated with a parasitic fungus known as ergot. Ergot is a fungus which grows on grain, most especially on rye, and it has a number of potent pharmacologic agents in it, especially one called isoergine, from which LSD is derived. The symptoms that are alluded to in the trial records are pinpricking, choking, disorderly behavior, convulsions, hallucinations. These are all the kinds of symptoms that you would expect from convulsive ergotism.
Okay, there she is, 1980, 4 years after the thing is published, on In Search Of, with Leonard Nimoy. Yeah, so, she's basically giving you that simplified version. So she's pitching it. Let's talk a little bit about ergot. Ergot grows on rye grain, and it's these large spur-like things that come out. It's a toxic fungus that's a parasite on rye grain and some other cereal grains. So that's it. Personally, if you ask me, farmers would notice it, you know? And also, it's potent, and over the years has been used during childbirth. They sometimes would give a little bit to staunch bleeding. There's medicinal qualities to it. And anybody that starts saying, oh, well, we know so much better. I'm sorry, there are a whole lot of things about agriculture that I don't know. I'm a fairly educated person, but I don't know what a farmer knows. And I just have to say that's really kind of obvious. But also, ergot is in our grain and bread anyway. There's always a little bit of it. I found an ad from 1945 for Wonder Bread. And part of the reason Wonder Bread was so wonderful, it kept out the dirt, the chaff from the wheat, and ergot. I'm thinking, really? That was a selling point. Wonder Bread doesn't have ergot. Who knew? So the other part of this is she needed to show that the growing conditions. I mean, she was looking back for different kinds of things. You heard her mention all the symptoms, but she also was looking for growing conditions. And this is our good friends, Boyer and Nissenbaum, their book that came out in '73. This is one of the books that she was using as a reference. And she noticed the river running through that part of Salem Village. And that would indicate that the fields were swampier. She looked at Samuel Sewell's diaries, and there seemed to be indications that the weather conditions are right. Now, there are only a few points of data in Sewell's diary about the weather, but the things she found matched up. These are the books that she had available to her. Most of us who do a lot of Salem already own those. There are a whole lot that have been published since then, especially because of the work Boyer and Nissenbaum had done. But within 7 months of the article's publication, if you don't know this, two guys, Spanos and Gottlieb, published a refutation in the same magazine, in Science magazine. And essentially, they said the symptoms don't match. Why didn't more people in the same households have these afflictions? We don't have reports of other than just a couple of people. Symptoms just don't come and go. You know, if you were poisoned by this, they definitely wouldn't just come and go and you're well in between. No. Plus, it wouldn't happen in sync with everybody else. So they really took it apart. They had charts, they had all these different things to just so, no, no, no. And that's what a lot of us know. Ergot, no, it's been debunked. These guys just went through it left and right and just nailed it. Okay, let's talk about LSD. Because this is what the key piece was when thinking about ergot. And I want to know, how do we know what we know? You know, we've got these guys disputing it, refuting it left and right, and yet we still have this notion that maybe they were tripping, maybe they were high. When I tell it to somebody for the first time, and yes, there are people out there who are hearing it for the first time from me, and I go, now I got to explain it, now you're going to remember it. Right? So it comes down to LSD, because people think, oh, they were tripping? We know about LSD. Well, this is Albert Hofmann, the guy who discovered it. He actually discovered it in 1938 and didn't think it was worth anything. He was using ergot to try and come up with other compounds that could be medically interesting. He worked for a chemical company in Switzerland, which I just learned today. What's one of those things that Michael Cohen, Novartis, is that the company he worked for is now Novartis. So I'm like, oh, everything I know is connected. So he discovered it in 38, but he really didn't discover how potent it was until 1943. And he was working with it and somehow came in contact with it and then felt a little strange. And he wondered if that was it, so he felt a little better. The next day he came in and actually dosed himself with it. And woo, everything went wild. And he took a bicycle ride while he was tripping. And apparently everything was just, he calls it bicycle day. Now, this is the only person we know who's been dosed with LSD who had no idea what it was going to do. So his descriptions of it aren't informed by anybody else. So in the world of LSD and psychotropic and all these different drugs, he's sort of the god. His book is My Problem Child. That's how he described it. But there were a lot of books that started being written about it. Now we have Aldous Huxley, that was in the 1950s. And then we have all these other things, a psychedelic experience. We've got the electric Kool-Aid acid test, all these different things. We were coming up in the early 60s as people started getting into psychedelics and different realms of experience. And, well, let me let Timothy Leary, he was a Harvard professor, and he started doing this stuff at Harvard, and the first person that got fired at Harvard at all was one of his colleagues who actually gave it to an undergrad. He had permission to do it with the graduate students, but not the undergrads. Timothy Leary will tell you.
To me, it was a complete religious, revelatory experience. It was as though God had taken me by the hand into his workshop and had let me look just for a few minutes at the design of 5 billion years of energy that had been developing and evolving on this planet.
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't stay at Harvard very long. Now, in the 60s, when you start getting the hippies and a lot of the anti-war movement centered in California, especially in San Francisco. So they have all these, here's the human being, and there's Timothy Leary right at the top. This is a picture of the Grateful Dead at Haight-Ashbury, which is sort of the hippie central. Curiously, Linda Caprell lived in Haight-Ashbury around the time. And I thought, oh, cool, she was right there on the front lines. She's seeing this stuff. And she said, actually, no, she and her husband, well, her husband went off to war. He was minesweeping in Vietnam. But they lived there because it was cheap. That's why the hippies were there. It was cheap. And I said, you had a front row seat. And she said, well, not really. She said she started working at age 13, has worked her entire life. She grew up in a family that liked books and education, and when she had the chance, she went off to UC Santa Barbara. The whole idea of, Timothy Leary says, tune in, turn on, drop out. The whole idea of dropping out was just, no, that was for rich kids whose parents could pay for it. No, she was in it. So she really wasn't part of this culture, from what I can tell. But, we have we have Woodstock coming along. And, of course, there was the cautions about the brown acid giving you bad trips. There were all these announcements. Timothy Leary starts getting a little funky. I mean, you saw him in a coat and tie, right? That's Harvard years. How about this?
We tell young people today, drop out of school, because schools, education today, is the worst narcotic drug of all. Don't politic, don't vote. These are old men's games. Impotent and senile old men that want to put you onto their old chess games of war and power. Drop out. Tune in with natural things. Take off your shoes. Get back in tune with God's harmony. Surround yourself with beauty and sacred objects. You can't get caught in the conforming, rote lockstep, which we call American society.
Got his mind expanded. He just with the sitar and stuff like that. I'm going to take you back a little bit with the Beatles. Because this is the same time that they're coming out with stuff. I'll just get a little clip. Inspired by Timothy Leary and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So this was John Lennon's Tibetan Book of the Dead era. And I'm going, Revolver? Oh my God, what was that, 1966? Wow. And there's a lot of other stuff. Moody Blues are doing things. You got Go Ask Alice, One Pill Makes You Larger, all that stuff. You've got Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze, and Are You Experienced? All that stuff came out of this culture. We also have something that was actually produced for kids. Yellow Submarine. But of course, the big song from that was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And on the Dick Cavett show, Lennon and Yoko were there, and he said, well, I want to ask you about this Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I mean, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, LSD. People are saying it's about LSD. And he goes, no! I'm going, Yeah, right. He said his son came home with a drawing, and he asked him, what was this a drawing of? And he said, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. He also said, then he went back through all of the titles of his songs to see if anything else spelled out anything. But it was quite a moment on Dick Cavett. We also have the art of Peter Max. I love Peter Max. When I was about 13, I asked my mom if I could have wire rim glasses, because I was 13 years old. I was in junior high. I wanted to be cool. But that happened to be the time when my optometrist had a selection of Peter Max branded glasses. I had designer glasses before anybody else. And all through high school, everybody knew I had Peter Max glasses. But the kind of wild, psychedelic, incredible colors are just amazing. Now, he's still doing stuff. A lot of it seems like, here's a picture of Mickey Mouse, and I put some psychedelic paint on it. He's made a lot of money over the years, but he started then, and that was kind of the image and the visual culture of this. When you start getting into the culture, though, then you start getting things like pulps. You know, it's in the culture. Yeah. So you got these pulp novels coming up, all about sex, orgies, and all that kind of stuff. So then you know that it's in the public mind, because if it's in the trash literature, they're thinking about it. But it also went into some of the magazines that more of us would have read. I don't think you've read LSD Orgy. But you probably read Time and some of those magazines. So they were all covering this and how it was affecting the young people. There was a little bit of that older generation not being really happy with the young. They have this moral panic that the young people are just destroying their minds, and they're fighting back about going to Vietnam. But the stories were making it into the mainstream press. This one is Popular Science. My LSD trip. I mean, it's everywhere. People are trying to discover, and this is non-cop, non-hippie. It's trying to say, we're not one side or the other. We're just going to be neutral and describe it. Around the time, maybe it was a little before I got my Peter Max glasses, so it was 8th grade, we had a drug awareness curriculum in science. Yeah, we're going to learn all about drugs. And I'm like, oh. I mean, the only thing I remember from it was that there are barbiturates and amphetamines. Now, one of them's an upper and one of them's a downer. And I went, oh, let's see, how do I remember that? This is how I still remember it. Upper starts with a vowel, and amphetamine starts with a vowel. Got it. Oh, one of them was red and one of them was blue. Okay. Let's see, barbiturates, blue. Got it. And that's what I remember. That's all I remember from that drug education thing. Although, I saw this film. The package came with a set of films about drugs. And when I ran across it online, it was just like, I remember this. Oh my goodness. There was one on marijuana, there was one on heroin, and there was one on LSD. They were produced by Lockheed. So I'm going to take just a little clip of it, because it's a little longer. To set it up, it has this woman who's at a party. And somebody asked her if she want to try drop some acid. Well, I'd never done it before, but okay. Here we've got peer pressure to take it. So she takes it, and then they go off to get a hot dog at a hot dog stand. And this is what happens.
No, it couldn't be. And I looked down at the hot dog, and there was a face on him. Eyes, nose, a mouth. I had put the ketchup to where it looked like his hair. And he started telling me that I couldn't eat him. That he had a wife and 7 kids at home to support.
Yeah, that gives you an idea of what kind of stuff I was exposed to in the 8th grade. Oh my, I love all the woo-woo music in the back and the sort of like lava lamp. It's sort of like burned film looking at it, so it's just a whoo. So they were trying to educate the youth of tomorrow. I'm still working on the barbiturates and amphetamines. Which one's which? This wasn't anything that was part of my life at all, and suddenly they're showing me this. Some of the other things that were going on. In 1968, this book was published. And this was describing what had happened in a French town in 1951, Pont-Saint-Esprit. And they had actually an ergot panic. It affected hundreds of people in town. This Here's the clip. It was in Life magazine in 1951. It killed a couple of people. It really, all the actual symptoms, you know, it wasn't like they came and went. It just, the whole town went crazy. And so that book came out in 68, 69. In talking to Linda, she said she remembers reading something about that maybe in Life magazine. So I'm digging through Life magazines. I only find it in 51. So she would have been negative a year, something like that. She would have been, it was from before she was born. And I said, well, maybe your family was like mine. We save Life magazines, which I know we do because my family is decluttering and there's a huge, huge crate of them that nobody ever looks at. Well, she didn't think maybe that was it, but I think it was this other book by Fuller. Fuller also wrote about the UFO in Exeter, New Hampshire. So he was always looking for something to try. So he was finding salacious stories to do. But he did a good job. So with all those things coming into play and all those influences, you know, here's her article. She's positing this. So you can see where, you know, all the influences that are coming in, and she's thinking in that way because everybody was thinking LSD, yeah, that could be a possibility. Well, how did it become known to so many people? I mean, I can't talk about Salem without at least one person doing it. We see a nice percentage here, but then again, that was the topic. So, it's these guys. This is how come everybody knows it. These are the science editors from some of the major newspapers. This guy on the left worked for the New York Daily News, you know, one of the rags. But the guy in the middle, John Noble Wilford, got in the right way. New York Times. John Gashko, Washington Post. So they started, so here we go, here's the Daily News, call Salem Witch Hunters hams on rye. Yeah, that's just sort of...
That's brilliant.
That's brilliant. It is, hams on rye. Hams on rye. Here's another one, but this is the Washington Post. Front page, below the fold, but still front page. And notice it's already saying LSD. Salem Witch Hunt, just a bad trip. One of the things about these is they quite often have a question mark. I don't see too many question marks in headlines. So they were bringing in this idea that, you know, maybe, sounds interesting. When we go to the New York Times, get this, linked, Salem Witch Hunt in 1692, linked to LSD-like agent. So there you go, the New York Times, front page, below the fold. Of course, we come to Boston, front page, above the fold. It was a bad trip in Salem. So that's how it was going. That's how it was being portrayed in the media. Also in Boston, we get this other story coming out. Historian disputes theory linking drugs to witches. This was actually written by a guy who writes for the Eagle Tribune. And he was also writing for UPI. And he had the bright idea, I'm going to call Steve Nissenbaum. I'm going to ask him about this. You know, let's talk to an historian and see what the historian thinks. And Steve is a nice guy. He's just kind of, you know, well, I don't think so. You know, you'd think it would happen other years too. You know, it seems kind of unlikely. He's a very nice guy. But this gets turned into a dispute. And these just started getting out there. They went out. Now, today, you want to get something to go viral, you go to the internet, you tweet, you do something like that, and that sends it viral. Boom, everybody knows. But in 1976, we didn't have the internet that we knew about. And what they had was the wire services. AP, UPI, and some of the big newspapers had their own, like the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Boston Globe, had their own wire service for their stories. So we start getting it everywhere. We get it from Biddeford, Maine, to Honolulu, Winnipeg, Biloxi, Mississippi, everywhere. It went everywhere. Well, maybe a few now. I collected over 220 clips. I just searched all over. The yellow ones are the only places I couldn't find one. So this is pretty, I still don't know why Maryland didn't get one. I actually looked specifically through all the Baltimore Sun issues for that week or so. Somehow they just didn't cover it. But it went everywhere. Within that first week, it was everywhere. So we have an interesting idea that sort of can hook into the LSD culture. We're having it everywhere. So we have to do a couple of other things. See, why did it really attach to the understanding of the world? I mean, we're saying it's embedded in this. Why is it attached? Well, in the news, there were other things going on. We had the Charles Manson trial. We had the Patty Hearst trial. Actually, Manson and his folks were tried like a year or two earlier. And some of them, they brought up LSD use for them. I like living in a world that doesn't include Charles Manson anymore. Keep him in jail till he dies. Oh, he died. Good. Then we had Patty Hearst, who was an heiress to the Hearst fortune, and she was kidnapped. And here she is as Tanya in on a bank robbery. But she was being tried and found guilty around that time. And there was talk about her being on LSD. We also have something a little more serious going on, and this is happening 75, 76. There were discoveries made about how the CIA was using LSD. And we ended up with two reports. The one on the left is the Rockefeller Commission. Rockefeller was Ford's vice president, and the president asked him to take a look into this, and that was in 75. And in 76, Senator Church from Idaho had another committee to investigate these things. So one of the things they did was they found CIA illegality, but they still sort of backed them. But you have all these things coming to the fore. The CIA was drugging people. So they infiltrated groups and gave them LSD. I mean, the CIA was doing this. But they did find that they weren't complicit in the JFK assassination, just to be sure. I didn't do that. That's like 4 solid pages in the New York Times covering excerpts from these reports. And when you look at some of them, testing program involved unwitting subjects. They weren't telling people they were dosing them. Surreptitious administration of LSD. Yeah, here's some more. The military attempted to conceal their overseas conceal their overseas operation, testing LSD. The military was doing it, trying to keep it apart from the CIA, but all these things were being revealed. And this huge spread in the New York Times just busted wide open. So, in addition, some of the people who were dosed, there's one fellow, his family discovered that he'd been one of the unwitting subjects. Somebody in the CIA had dosed him, and he ended up going out a window on the 10th floor of a hotel in New York City to his death. So as this stuff was coming out, the family is going, you guys did this? And they sued the United States and won. This is the story of Frank Olson. Does anybody have Netflix?
Yeah, we can watch it. It's really good.
Yes. Have you seen this one? Yeah. It's a docudrama. They actually, Frank Olson's son, who was there for the whole thing, really got obsessed with how his father had died. And a lot of it is just him talking. And if you see Wormwood, this is a 6-part docudrama, because they reenact some things. But yes, at the beginning they thought it was LSD, and that's why he jumped as a suicide. But by the end, they said it was a wet works thing for the CIA, and he was too much trouble, and they say they shoved him out the window. But in 76, it was about, they doped him up with LSD, and he went right out a window to his death. So this is a big thing. This had happened in the late 50s, so they were just discovering this when the New York Times did this big reveal. So also, we're finding one other thing that's happening, and this is actually happening the week that Linda Capral's article was published. We're starting to hear that Tokyo and other countries are claiming our CIA had used LSD on prisoners of war in the Korean conflict. They were experimenting for mind control and brainwashing, but this is a huge accusation. Here again, this is Australia. CIA used LSD in Asia. We didn't see too much of that in the American papers, but this was one of the things that people on that side of the world were a little concerned about when they heard that the CIA was using this drug and doing mind control experiments and brainwashing. In some of the stuff I've read about it, the CIA sounded like a fraternity. They were dosing each other's tricks. I'm going to put that in his... They were just using it like it was caffeine, maybe? I don't know. But they were dosing people. One of the things the CIA wanted to know is, would their agents understand when they were dosed by the enemy? So they, of course, had to experience it. But it seemed very dangerous. And they also seemed pretty cavalier about it. So now they're being told, you can't do this. When this stuff comes out, the Senate says, no more of that. And they also were talking about the Army. Yeah, everybody, you can't be doing this anymore. So this is what's going on. That's in April 1976. You know, the accusations are coming in from abroad, and just the same week that Linda's article is published and gone over the wire services, by the end of the month, we're all saying, no, you can't do any of this because it's so bad. So this is the milieu in which this took root. So we already have Manson, we have the CIA. Well, we also, in this time period, had Love Canal and the W.R. Grace thing in Woburn. There were a lot of toxic places in the United States that kids were getting sick. You have a cluster of kids with leukemia. There was something toxic in the environment. And it turns out, of course, they made all these housing developments on top of toxic waste dumps. But still, there's something in the environment. There's a poison that we don't understand until later on you dig back and say, oh my God, look what they did. So these were coming up in the early to mid 70s, that there was something in the environment that was poisoning people. So this also was a different kind of way for that whole notion of these kids being poisoned by something in their environment. So this is why I think it stuck. In the early 70s, we had a lot of things. 1970, we had the EPA, however that's doing these days, excuse my political thing. 72, we had the Clean Water Act. 76, the Toxic Substance Control Act. They were trying to keep track, what are these things? And the Superfund law came in about 1980. So this is something on people's mind. Let's control what's going on. Because, the kids, kids with leukemia, you have to pay attention to some of that thing. So there we are, we've gotten up to about 1980. Well, in 1982, voila, Mary Matosian, Stanford educated, undergrad and doctorate, historian at the University of Maryland, and she starts publishing things about the impact of mold and fungi on history. So she did this, and goes right back to the Salem affair. She doesn't make any, well, when Linda did it at the end, she said, it's possible. It's not conclusive, but, this is a possibility. Mary Matosian went right for it. She was just, and it made the news too. Here we go. New study backs that thing. So, again, the New York Times. But she was more absolute. Made a lot of stuff in the news. Now, finally, the Baltimore Sun. She was at the University of Maryland, so I'm sure that's why it's in there. So she's out there. She's put that forward. She's going to write a book. But she gets that out there. It's in all sorts of newspapers. And so our friend Nick Spanos wrote about it at length. So this is actually the one, if you really want to know a little bit more about it, he just went right at it immediately. So at that point I was going, who is this guy? Everybody cites him. He's refuting the Ergot thing. Who is he? Well, here he is. He was another behavioral psychologist. Linda Capril's a behavioral psychologist. Who knew? So here he is, and the kinds of things he was interested in. For starters, he was prolific, absolutely prolific. In his career that went from 67 to 94, when he was unfortunately killed in a single plane accident off of Martha's Vineyard, he had published 3 books, 22 chapters in books, and 213 articles. It was just like, what is it with this guy? And when I read his obituary, they were saying, oh yeah, he was just prolific. He could just turn something out like that. He liked debating things. He thought that was wonderful. He'd call people in the middle of the night. I'm thinking, what's he on? I really don't know. But he was just known as being prolific and good and always in it for debate. So some of the things he liked talking about were UFO abductions, or the accounts. People would say, I was abducted by a UFO. Speaking in tongues. multiple personality disorder, demonic possession, eyewitness testimony, false memories of abuse that he does there, a lot of stuff on hypnosis. So he was really interested in those, and he would debunk them all. And it wasn't until I saw the second article, when he's going after Mary Matosian's article, that there's a whole section where he talks about what he thinks happened. And he's got a single note for this. His single bullet on this is that all of these strange behaviors or these claims are really part of a dynamic of responding to what's expected of them. You know, here you are, the judges were expecting symptoms of affliction, and sure enough, the girl's tied right into that. UFO sightings, well, you just sort of, you have that conversation and you come up with those symptoms because that matches the expectation in this social agreement, and they just go into it. Now, whether it's intentionally or not, but these are the kinds of conversations and relationships that would explain all of these things. I mean, really, single bullet. It was this sort of a social contract on how to have those conversations and what you would have to manifest to actually be part of the expectation of the receiver. So he was a pretty intense guy. And the more I found out about him, I'm like, wow. He was very popular. He was at Carleton University in Canada and just had a great following. But that's the guy who everybody counts on for the great refutation of the article. We also start getting stuff in the movies and books. Anybody remember, what's his name? Robin Cook. Yeah, he did Coma. He did a lot of medical thrillers. And this is the one he did that had to do with toxic fungus, acceptable risk. And you see what the title is in Spanish, Los Archivos de Salem. A little more obvious. The basic story, as I remember it, because I read it a long time ago, was that a couple of researchers in Boston are trying to come up with new drugs. And one of them happens to have inherited a house through her family line all the way back to Salem Village. And somewhere she went into the basement and she found this fungus. And she brought a sample of it back to the lab in Boston. Okay, and then they managed to derive some fantastic new drug that was going to answer everything. Well, it also got made into a movie with Chad Lowe. Chad Lowe's character decides, well, we can't wait for all the trials, to test it out. So the acceptable risk was the risk that he did it on himself. And of course, it didn't go well. This is sort of harkens back to Hoffman testing things on himself. Yeah, so it apparently didn't go well. As I recall, things were wonderful during the daytime, but it was kind of a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. At night, the horrible things that were happening. So that, it's just a story. People read a lot of just trash thrillers and things like that, and then there's a movie with Chad Lowe. We're also starting to see a bunch of other explanations coming around this time that are basically tied to medical explanations, whether it's encephalitis or it's Lyme disease, Huntington's disease. So this has also spurred a lot more possibilities that there was a medical explanation for everything. Then come around, we're up to about 1999. In 2001, Linda Caprell resurfaces. Yes, on PBS. Secrets of the Dead. I'll let her talk.
It was almost as if the description in the pharmacological reference had been taken from the trial records themselves. It was just extraordinary, and that for me was a real eureka moment.
Okay, eureka moment. Once you figured that out, I was just like, huh? What can I prove this? But she's looking at this, she's trying to put some things together. She has a lot of aha moments. And don't we all want an aha moment where suddenly everything falls into place? So she was having aha moments. There she is, a science major, taking a history class so she can graduate. So this also has some interesting other pieces to it. Here's another one. It starts off with a little yelling because they're describing a bad trip, and this is footage from Woodstock.
While the bewitched settlers of Salem may have been suffering from something like this, a bad acid trip, surely they had no access to LSD. Or did they?
that's the kind of thing it was. Actually, after this came out, Jane Kamensky, she was a history professor at Brandeis when this happened, and then she's now at Harvard. She slammed this thing, saying, this is the thing that won't go away. So that kind of stuff is in this. I mean, PBS, really, this is your tax dollars at work? But there also was an interesting chunk. Mary Matosian was saying not only that, yes, the Salem stuff was definitely, she was also going wider and talking about all the witch hunts and having a relationship. So I'll let her talk. We'll get a little overview, and then we'll actually see Mary Matosian.
If outbreaks of ergot poisoning were prevalent, did they coincide with the rash of witch executions across Europe? It was Professor Mary Matosian who made the startling discovery.
I got into Europe because I had to account for the fact that witchcraft persecution happens in certain years and not others, in certain places, not others. So I had to cover the map to make sure I wasn't missing something.
The witch trials that ravaged Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries were localized in very specific areas, as shown here. In Britain, the great witch hunts were centered around Essex and East Anglia. Matosian discovered that the areas where witch trials and executions took place did coincide with the major rye-growing regions. But not only that, in that 200-year period, the weather conditions in Western Europe were different from today. They were perfect for the formation of ergot on rye.
Now, see, Linda Capral's article, she really was talking about the very first accusations and the first reactions of people on a specific year in a specific place. And she's looking at individual symptoms that are seeming to go together. But this sort of takes it out in la-la land. You know, it's just, it explains everything. When some of this got sent out, you know, it made the papers too. There was an interesting article about it, and it claimed that of these 40,000 things, look at this, traced to the same cause, all these witchcraft accusations, every instance, all the instances, it just sort of this vast explanation for everything. Again, single bullet. She came out with a whole book, Poisons of the Past, that came out in '89. So, I don't know, anybody else have this book? Yeah, it's in that list of things. You always have that one. So when that came out, it was in the papers. Puzzles of the Past, blames on fungus in the rye. There were also some things where they said that it explained the French Revolution. There were all sorts of different things from European history that apparently this was just all-encompassing. Blame it all on ergot. So it's a little bit much. So I understand why Linda says she really didn't think it was her. She thought it was Mary Matosian. And there was a lot more discussion in academia because there were reviews of her book. And people, you know, there were people who said, oh, this is wonderful, and others said, you're kidding me. And in academia, she decided she was going to reply to some of those negative reviews. So she actually did this. Now, back with Linda Capral, when she had her article come out, and then Spanos and Gottlieb refuted it, she said that her editor at Science asked her, do you want to reply to them? That's good, you know, because they like discourse. And she told me that she thought that Spanos and Gottlieb's first article seemed a little emotional to her. And you know, judging from what I know about Nick Spanos, he was really passionate about stuff, and he would just go at these things. So she had a sense they were maybe a little emotional, and she asked the editor and said, well, do you think they're emotional? And she wrote back, well, kinda. So she passed it off. She didn't get into that back and forth about it. In addition to all this media that's going on, we start finding this has creeped its way into education. So here we go. I found this, the Witch's Curse worksheet. Essentially, I paid $2 for it. Twice. Forgot I had it. And basically, students would watch this video, and it had questions that they could answer in order as they watched the video. Now, I don't know about you, but when a teacher says, this is it, And here, we're going to watch this video, and you're going to listen to it, and you get it in, and you're going to put it back down on the paper. That starts cementing an idea. There's no question that this was the case. So that starts getting in there. We also start seeing it pop up in online, because we see these things. This is for a mold removal company. And here we go, yes. Toxic mold causes people to go mad. What a great advertisement for your service. We'll get the mold out of your house so you don't go mad. You know, I mean, it isn't really exactly what they're saying, but that's the end result. You know, we don't want you to go mad. We'll clean that black mold out of your cellar. Ghostbusters, yes. Actually, this is in the Encyclopedia Britannica site. And here we go. How rye bread may have caused the Salem witchcraft trials. So we're seeing it in some places that seem legit. Not just the mold removal people. Then I've also had people say, oh, I learned about it in college. My professor said they were eating magic mushrooms. And I'm going, well, they weren't doing psilocybin, but really? Magic mushrooms? Well, you have a fungus, made you hallucinate. People leap to the conclusions that their own brain makes from these things. You hear fungus, you hear hallucinations. And I don't know whether you go to LSD or magic mushrooms, but it depends on what your experience is and what you're going to pick out and how you're going to add to whatever you see. And you fill in the blanks. One of the funnier aspects, I'd moved in with somebody, and my mom came over to visit, and she looked at this trivet, a ceramic trivet that I had, at least I thought I had. She said, oh, it had a picture of Nubble Light on it. And I said, oh, and she said, where's this from? And I said, oh, my brother and sister-in-law gave it to me, because they lived in New York, right near Nubble Light. Well, I said, okay, and continued on. And then the person I was living with asked me, he said, well, since when did your brother and sister-in-law give you the trivet that I've owned for longer than I've known you? So for me, I was filling in the gap. I knew that there was a trivet in my house with a picture of Nubble Light, and my brother and sister-in-law, they must have given it to me. I didn't even think twice. And she said it was really, really strange to her how quickly and firmly that I asserted that my brother and sister-in-law had given that to me. Wow. We fill in blanks. And sometimes we don't even know it. I was certain that had to have been the solution. I didn't realize I was being observed and judged. But we do. We fill in blanks with the kind of information we have. We find something in the middle. So if you hear fungus and hallucinations, it depends on what you know, how you're going to get it. Well, but the people said they had heard it in their textbooks and their professors. So I started looking. So here, microbes and society. This is one of the ones I like because, where is it? Yeah, this person talks about the undergraduate. Hey, not bad for an undergraduate history paper. This is prep for getting life experience credits for graduating from high school. I love this one. The village doctor had only known about ergot poisoning. This tragedy could have been avoided. I mean, really? I mean, that's sort of taking it down a hole. If they'd been smarter or knew more about science, the witchcraft trials would never have happened. Mind spaces. This is another, here we go. One of the most concrete studies. Most concrete studies? Really? So here they are, they're trying to promote it. There are other books, abnormal psychology, I found little things. And you find these little boxes of stuff that'll talk about it. Human brain, all this stuff, all these science, Handy Science Answer book had a whole section on it. And then we get to this one. This is Essential Biology. It's published in 2015. And I asked around, I'm preparing for this, I asked all my friends on Facebook, said, any of you got any textbooks that has this? And one of my friends said, yeah, and she took a picture of the page of this. Notice it's not a photograph. I have actually seen the book itself and a PDF of it. So I read it and I went, huh. And she said, you know, the guy who wrote it is in Henniker at New England College. Really? Okay, that's not too far. I live in Manchester. So I called him up. And I said, what can you tell me about how you use this? And he said, well, it appears in biology textbooks that are for non-science majors. It doesn't seem to appear in the science major kind of textbook, but this particular one is in a chapter on plants and fungi. And he said, you know, the two really don't go together, but the structure of this particular textbook, which has been in many editions when he came to it, was to put plants and fungi together. And because it was something for non-science majors, they're always trying to come up with something that's relevant that will make people say, oh wow, science has the answer. That's interesting, crossing disciplines. And he said, this is perfect. It was a fungus on a plant. And it was inherently interesting because it had the Salem witchcraft trials. And I said, well, that's really interesting why it keeps getting in, although not bad for an undergraduate history paper. But the more I talked to him, his name's Eric Simon. He's brilliant. I've asked around about him, and he is brilliant. PhD in biochem from Harvard. I heard he is a trivia genius. Has done so well. And when I was talking to him, boy, he knew all that stuff about the Church Commission and all these cool things. I finally felt like I was talking to somebody who knew the stuff so I could ask questions. It was really amazing. But one of the things about the way he treated it, was this is the section. He basically has figured out, in ways that nobody else who's written about this, all the stuff I've read, he describes this with the scientific method. That she had an observation. Oh, she has all this information about the pin pricking and things like that. Then she asked a question. The question was, okay, they've been saying psychological things, but I wonder if there was some kind of medical reason that they were having these. So she had a question, and then she said, oh, I have a hypothesis. Yes, there was. There's a possibility. These symptoms match up with things you've got for LSD. You have the right growing conditions. They were in the right area. So she had a prediction that she would find more information. She would find information about more of the symptoms of ergotism, where the crop was growing, what the conditions were, all those things. So she asked a question, and then she got results. Now, he says, results are suggestive, not conclusive. Let's look back at what Linda had to say at the end of her article. Of course, there can never be hard proof. Circumstantial case is demonstrable. She says it's circumstantial. Now, all these people say, oh, Linda Caprile really goes for this. No, she was using the scientific method. Now, in science, if you're doing an experiment, you go through many iterations. You find, well, I wonder if this, what if I tweak this? Why don't I give it a little bit more of that, or a little less, or something else? That's what you do in science, is you do experiments, and you go again and again. But she's taking on history, and you can't really go back and change history unless you're in some kind of sci-fi thing. So now somebody's going to write a sci-fi thing about it. Going back in history and trying to change things. Except that they remember. So she only had one iteration of it. And that's because it's history. You can't go back and change things. You can look for more evidence, as she's saying, make a prediction. And that's what Spanos and Gottlieb were doing. They're in the same field. They're in psychology. So they're just trying to pile on all the evidence that they know of to say, no, this doesn't work. But that's not really how the scientific method works. So she was just applying one basic thing to it. I think her article, if you have not read it, or read it recently, I suggest you go read it. Because everybody has this idea of what she did. And basically, the first part, she gives a really good summary of what happened in the Salem witch trials. I mean, she read that stuff she had, and she nails it. And then she goes on to do this scientific method on the actual stuff, and said it's suggestive, circumstantial, but it's interesting. Now, that's not definitive for her. But I really came to figure that, she was doing something scientists do. And we, historians and humanity people, do it somehow very differently. And that's one of the things about having all these different academic disciplines. They're all a filter. However you see stuff, it's a filter, and what you see and what you don't see. It's a lens that can focus on something else. So when you have these two going together, the reason Eric Simon put this in was that he really wanted people to see that you could use the scientific method to look at other things. And it had purposes across disciplines. And that was his example. And frankly, he's the only person in all the reading that I've done who actually has nailed what she did. So scientists see it differently. Just to add a little bit more here. This is an article. I don't know if you know that Mary Beth Norton at Cornell would do an undergraduate symposium. and encourage undergraduates to do really hard research. I mean, really good stuff, not just undergraduate throwaway papers like maybe, St. Luce in Salem. No, she was really putting, actually, Linda's paper was great. She would have loved being in Mary Beth Norton's class. But this guy, Joe Featherly, who wrote one of those papers, the Black Devil called Ergot, he came in as a plant science major. Science. He went through, and he managed to debunk Spanos and Gottlieb. Yeah, he went through all their arguments and said, well, no. One of them was that to really get the maximum effect of ergotism, you had to have vitamin A deficiency. And clearly, farmers, have with milk, live on the seaside where you get fish, are not going to get a vitamin A deficiency. So Spanos and Gottlieb were trying to say this would more protect them so they wouldn't be apt to get attacked by ergot. But it turns out when Joe looked around, that was based on something from the 1920s and 30s by a researcher named Barber, and it turns out he didn't think that was the case at all. So Joe was looking at what they were saying and then taking that apart. And Mary Beth Norton told me, she said, this is probably the best response she's ever seen. So, well, while we're talking about Mary Beth Norton, do you guys know who these are? These people are?
No.
No? Anybody? The left guy, cheats. The guy on the left is Steve Nissenbaum. The guy who writes Paul Boyer. You've heard these names, Boyer and Nissenbaum. These are later, these are pictures taken later in life, not when they were actually, in the fervor of their youth, when they were at UMass Amherst as young professors doing something. These are the guys, and this is the basic map of Salem Village, and that line right down the middle. And the people on the west side, they were the farmers, and the family fortunes were going down. And people on the east side, well, that was closer to Salem proper and mercantile trade, and their family fortunes were going up. And that's why the farmers, people on that side, were accusing the people in the east. I think it was in 2007, Ben Ray from the University of Virginia and Dick Latner from Tulane went through and took apart the facts. And Ben Ray took apart the map and said, well, it has incomplete data. Let's put in all the people. Oh, this is in the wrong place, and rearrange it. Suddenly, that line up and down made no sense. It was untrue. And when you're looking at Boyer and Nissenbaum, they really explain the social context of things based on this map. It's a very simple thing. Well, Linda had her eureka moment, so did Boyer and Nissenbaum. In 1970, this was the original map. They took all these different maps, put them down on the floor, and then put them together and went, oh my goodness, there are geographic differences between where the accusers were and the accused. But that doesn't look anything like that north-south line. No. And one of their papers that they produced, a friend of mine found it, they actually at one point had the line going diagonally, more like the original Eureka. But this is an example of how your Eureka moment looks like one thing, and then gets distilled down to something that's almost diamond accurate. That north-south line demarcate these things. Also, Dick Latner went through, found out about the family fortunes going up and down. He discovered that Boyer and Nissenbaum had only used 1 year of tax rolls. How do you tell if somebody's family fortunes are going up or down with one data point? He actually had given the assignment to one of his classes to take another year of the tax rolls and see how that worked. And it didn't. And the kids are going, okay, they left. And he's going, wait, what happened here? So he went through all the tax rolls, and he actually found that 1695, the tax roll that Boyer and Nissenbaum used, was an anomaly. And actually, the farmers' family fortunes were going up, while the people toward the city, the family fortunes are going down. That just changes so much of those things on social influences that Boyer and Nissenbaum had based their whole thing on. But people don't really begrudge Boyer and Nissenbaum for this work. They don't attack them. As a matter of fact, at the conference, at Omohundro conference in Quebec City, when Ben and Dick presented these, the comment and chair of the panel was John Demos. John Demos from Yale, guy who wrote Entertaining Salem, big guy. He stood up And he basically reamed them a new one. And he said, you know, it's like, no, you can't say this about them. And I'm sitting there as sort of this young person, I'm thinking, seems to me getting facts wrong is important. But he said, no, they had a big idea. I go, oh, that's how we work in history. So they had a big idea. Well, the idea itself sometimes is more important, and we also distill things down. In history, the big idea was, hey, you could look at it this way. But when it finally comes around and appears to the public, things get simplified. Have you seen this little news cycle for science news? Starts in the upper right. You do your research. You know, A causes B it correlates statistically under certain circumstances. And then, of course, your university wants to say something about it. Well, you know, potential link. It's getting a little closer. Then you go on, and the news will put A causes B, say scientists. You know, because that's what the newspapers are like. And then, of course, you go on the interwebs, and, you know, scientists have to kill us again because people there get really excited. Then, you know, the big news, you know, what does this mean for Obama? But, yeah, but it also says A causes B all the time. You get to your local channel, and they're just sort of, you know, are they out to kill us? You know, those special little things that they have with the investigative reporter. You know, is this the secret that you didn't know about? And then finally you get to your grandma. You know, she's wearing the hat because, well, she wants to ward off A. So that's something about the news cycle that anything in science takes. And one of the things about Boyer and Isambard, people have forgiven them a whole lot of that because they do like the big idea. But with the stuff on Ergot, this is the cycle that happened. You know, it just sort of went around and suddenly, yes, this is absolute. I'd like to get back to Linda a little bit. I really had a wonderful time in my communications with her. She gave me things to think about. I was really impressed because I didn't know some of these things. One of the things I didn't know, wait for it, she found out who one of the anonymous readers was of her paper that got it into Science Magazine. Somebody had been hired into her department, somebody new, and it turned out to be Paul Boyer's daughter. And he sometimes came to some of their faculty gatherings, and one of those times he said, just so you know, I was one of the anonymous readers that gave the thumbs up to publish your article. Paul Boyer basically helped get that published. So right from the beginning, she's got buy-in. She didn't know it, but I mean that's a really important endorsement to get Paul Boyer to say, hey, let's publish. So I thought that was pretty cool. I think if you're talking to people about this afterwards, and well, do you think it's true? It's not really a matter of is it true or is it not? Do you believe it? Do you not believe it? I think it takes a little more nuanced approach. I know that everybody says, well, do you believe it? I've been talking this over lunch with all sorts of people, and they still, that last question is, so do you believe it? I believe that Linda got it right. It's circumstantial. It's interesting. That's a particular critical piece to look through it. I think Mary Matosian is, as Linda started out, I think Mary Matosian is the one who went overboard on it and made it absolute and explaining 40,000 witchcraft killings. I mean, that's just too massive, too expansive. One of the things that Linda talked about was just trying to figure out why anybody does what they do. You know, we can have all sorts of explanations for these. You know, do you know why you did this? She said, actually, most people can't describe why they did 2 weeks ago. So if you did something 2 weeks, why? And she said, historians, you know, always trying to figure out why people did things. And they've been dead for 300 years. You know, we can't tell what we did yesterday. So she thinks that's sort of one of the problems with history is we try to figure out these things without really having enough information. So I like that a lot. I really appreciate everybody's willingness to come out on this beautiful evening and sit in here and listen to me natter on about this. But I hope I've given you some things to think about. I will take questions, but I just want to thank all the people. These are my sources for all of this, and the people that really helped me put this all together. I had a blast, and this is the premiere of this talk, and thank you all for coming.